Every woman dreams about her wedding night. Isla Everglyn spent hers standing alone in a frozen palace, while her husband rode away without looking back. By sunrise, the new Luna had disappeared so completely that even the kingdom believed she had died. Years later, Alpha King Evander Frostbane would win wars, crush rebellions, and build the strongest kingdom in the north. None of it would matter, because history would remember him for one thing: the king who left his bride alone on the night she became his wife. The wedding had been magnificent. After 20 years of war, the kingdoms of Frostbane and Everglyn had finally chosen peace over bloodshed. Their peace had names: Evander and Isla. Neither had married for love. Everyone understood that. The alliance demanded sacrifice, and 2 young rulers had given theirs without complaint. The moon temple echoed with blessings as they exchanged vows beneath the silver light of the sacred moonstone. When the High Elder declared them husband and wife, thousands of voices erupted in celebration. For one evening, enemies became allies. The palace glittered with music, laughter, and dancing that lasted well past midnight. Isla moved through the celebration with effortless grace. She thanked visiting nobles, welcomed frightened servants from the southern kingdom who had traveled with her, remembered the names of elderly generals who seemed surprised that a new queen cared enough to ask. More than once, guests whispered to one another, "She'll make a wonderful Luna." Each compliment made Isla smile. Perhaps this marriage could become more than a treaty. She wasn't foolish enough to expect romance overnight. But respect, friendship, trust, those could grow. She believed that. Near midnight, the final tradition remained. The Alpha King would escort his bride to the Luna Wing, where husband and wife would begin their new life together. Evander stood and offered her a small smile. It wasn't warm, but it was sincere. "Shall we?" Before Isla could answer, the great doors of the banquet hall burst open. A royal guard stumbled inside, breathing hard. "Your Majesty." The music stopped instantly. The guard dropped to one knee. "The northern border has been attacked." The room froze. Every eye turned toward the Alpha King. Evander didn't hesitate. Duty had ruled his life long before marriage ever entered it. He turned to Isla. For just a moment, regret flickered across his face. "I have to go." She searched his eyes, then nodded. "Of course. I'll return before dawn." His promise came quickly. Certain. Absolute. Isla offered a gentle smile. "I'll wait." He squeezed her hand once, then released it. Moments later, the great palace doors closed behind him. The sound echoed through the empty hall. Isla watched the doorway long after everyone else had returned to celebrating. She didn't know it yet, but she had just watched her husband walk out of their marriage before it had truly begun. The palace grew quieter with every passing hour. One by one, the musicians packed away their instruments. The visiting nobles retired to their guest chambers. Servants collected empty goblets and extinguished hundreds of candles until only the soft glow of wall sconces remained. Still, Isla waited. She had changed out of her heavy wedding gown and into a simple ivory robe embroidered with tiny silver snowflakes. The Luna crown rested upon her head, its delicate silver branches catching the candlelight whenever she turned toward the door. Every few minutes, she looked up. Every few minutes, hope whispered the same thing. "He'll be back." A young maid entered, carrying a pot of hot tea. "Your Grace," she said shyly, "would you like me to stay with you?" Isla smiled kindly. "Thank you, but no." He promised he'd return before dawn. The maid curtsied and quietly withdrew. Hours slipped away. The fire burned lower. The tea grew cold. Outside the tall windows, snow drifted gently across the palace gardens, covering the world in silent white. Then came another knock. This one was softer, almost hesitant. "Come in," Isla called. The door opened. Lady Vivian Ashmore stepped inside, wearing a dark emerald cloak trimmed with white fur. She had once been the woman everyone expected Alpha King Evander Frostbane to marry. Beautiful, elegant, born into one of the oldest noble families in the kingdom. She smiled with practiced sympathy. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all." Isla rose politely. "I didn't realize anyone was still awake." Vivienne glanced toward the untouched wedding chamber. "So, you're still waiting." Isla nodded. "The battle must have delayed him. I'm sure he'll return soon." Vivienne's expression softened. Or perhaps it only appeared to. "You really don't know." Isla frowned. "Know what?" Vivienne looked away, as though debating whether to speak. Then she sighed. "I shouldn't say anything. Please." Another pause. Finally, Vivienne met her eyes. When Evander disappears in the middle of the night, she forced a small, almost apologetic smile. "He usually comes to me." The words hung in the air, sharp, cold, impossible to ignore. Isla stared at her. Surely that couldn't be true. "The northern border was attacked," she whispered. "So everyone says." Vivienne adjusted one of her gloves. "I only thought you deserved honesty." With that, she curtsied and quietly left the room. The door clicked shut. Silence returned. Isla stood perfectly still. She wanted to dismiss the words, to believe they meant nothing, but doubt had already found its way into her heart. She looked toward the empty doorway. The corridor beyond remained dark. No footsteps, no familiar voice, no husband returning to keep his promise. Slowly, she reached up and removed the Luna crown. She held it in both hands for a long moment, then placed it gently on the neatly made bed. Beside it lay the ceremonial cloak she had worn only hours earlier. She didn't touch it. Instead, she wrapped herself in a thick winter cloak hanging near the door. No luggage, no servants, no farewell, only silence. She opened the chamber doors and stepped into the snow-covered night. The palace guards bowed as she passed. No one questioned their new Luna. No one imagined she wasn't coming back. By the time dawn painted the eastern sky with pale gold, the royal suite stood completely empty. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, a lone figure disappeared into the heart of the winter storm. Evander rode through the palace gates just after sunrise. His armor was stained with blood. Snow clung to his black cloak. The battle at the northern border had lasted until dawn, but the attack had been repelled. The enemy had retreated beyond the mountains. His generals celebrated the victory. Evander barely heard them. Only one thought had carried him through the freezing night. Isla is waiting. He had broken promises before. To himself, to friends, even to his council. He had never intended to break the very first promise he made to his wife. Without removing his armor, he strode through the palace. Servants bowed hurriedly as he passed. "My king." Later. He climbed the marble staircase 2 steps at a time. The Luna Wing stood at the end of the eastern corridor. Its double doors remained closed. He smiled to himself. Perhaps she had finally fallen asleep. He would apologize. Explain everything. They would laugh about how fate had interrupted the most important night of their lives. He pushed the doors open. Silence greeted him. The fire had burned to ashes. The breakfast tray left outside the chamber remained untouched. The bed had never been slept in. His smile disappeared. "Isla?" No answer. He crossed the room quickly. The wardrobe doors stood open. Most of the shelves were empty. The elegant white wedding gown rested neatly across a chair, carefully folded instead of discarded. Then he saw it. The Luna crown, placed in the center of the bed, as though someone had returned it. His heartbeat quickened. No! He searched the adjoining sitting room, the balcony, the dressing chamber. Nothing. She was gone. A glimmer of polished wood caught his eye on the bedside table. A small cedar box, one he didn't remember seeing before. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside lay a single silver ring, her wedding ring. Folded beneath it rested a piece of parchment. Only one sentence had been written in careful handwriting. A marriage shouldn't begin with someone waiting alone. The words struck harder than any blade he had faced on the battlefield. His fingers tightened around the note. The room suddenly felt unbearably cold. The royal steward appeared hesitantly in the doorway. "Your Majesty?" Evander looked up. "When did she leave?" The steward swallowed. "No one knows. The night guards believed her grace was taking a walk. They didn't stop her." Evander closed his eyes. A walk. His bride had walked out of the palace, wearing only a winter cloak. "Into the coldest night of the year. Send riders." His voice was low, then louder. "Search every road, every village, every forest. I don't care how long it takes. Find my queen." Within minutes, the palace exploded into motion. Royal guards galloped through the gates in every direction. Messengers rode to neighboring territories. Hunters searched frozen rivers and mountain trails. Days passed, then weeks. The snow erased every footprint. Every trail ended in white silence. At last, the search captains returned one by one. Each carried the same answer: nothing. Most of the kingdom slowly accepted the only explanation that seemed possible. No one survived alone in those mountains during midwinter. Everyone believed the new Luna had been claimed by the storm. Everyone, except an elderly herbalist living deep inside Frostpine Forest. Because on the morning after the blizzard, she discovered a young woman lying unconscious beneath the snow, still breathing, barely. Maeve Hollowmere had lived in Frostpine Forest for nearly 40 years. Some called her a healer. Others called her a witch. She answered to neither. "I simply help whoever finds my door," she often said. That winter morning, however, someone hadn't made it to her door. They had collapsed beneath an ancient pine tree, only a few hundred steps away. Maeve noticed the torn edge of a white cloak beneath the snow. At first, she thought it was another traveler who had lost the battle against winter. Then she saw the hand. Still, pale, but warm. "Breathe, child," Maeve whispered, as she knelt beside the unconscious woman. "You've come too far to stop now." With the help of her old sled dog, she pulled the stranger through the forest to her small cabin. For 3 days, the young woman drifted between sleep and fever. Maeve brewed herbs, changed bandages on frost-bitten hands, fed her warm broth one careful spoonful at a time. On the 4th morning, the stranger finally opened her eyes. For several moments, she stared at the wooden ceiling above her, confused, safe, alive. Maeve smiled from the fireplace. "Welcome back." The young woman tried to sit up. Pain forced her back against the pillows. "You've been asleep for days." Silence lingered. Finally, Maeve asked gently, "What's your name?" The answer came after a long pause. "Isla." Maeve nodded. "And what are you running from?" Isla looked toward the frost-covered window. She thought of the wedding, the empty chamber, the promise that had been broken before the sun had risen. Then she quietly answered, "A life that no longer belongs to me." Maeve didn't ask another question. Some wounds revealed themselves only after time. The weeks that followed passed peacefully. Isla helped grind herbs when her hands healed, swept the cabin floor, collected firewood, listened while villagers arrived seeking medicine. An injured hunter, a pregnant mother, an elderly shepherd whose cough had worsened with the cold. Maeve welcomed them all. She accepted payment only when people could spare it. Otherwise, she accepted gratitude, or nothing at all. Spring arrived, then summer. When Maeve grew too tired to travel between distant villages, Isla volunteered to carry medicine in her place. One journey became many. She discovered abandoned settlements where children had never learned to read. Widows struggling through harsh winters alone. Families sharing too little food among too many mouths. Instead of passing through, she stayed. She organized seed exchanges between villages. opened small healing houses using empty barns, taught young girls to read by candlelight after the day's work was done. Slowly, hope returned to places long forgotten by the kingdom. Years passed. People stopped calling her by her family name. To them, she became something else entirely, the Snow Luna, not because she wore a crown, because she always arrived before the harshest storms, carrying medicine, blankets, and bread. She asked for nothing. She simply stayed until people no longer needed her. One autumn afternoon, a traveling merchant arrived at the village square. He smiled as children ran to greet Isla. "I've never seen anyone so loved." An old farmer chuckled. "The Snow Luna changes lives." The merchant nodded thoughtfully. "I should tell the king." Those simple words made Isla's smile falter for the first time in 3 years. Far away in the capital, rumors of a mysterious woman rebuilding the northern mountains had already begun reaching the royal court, and one man listened more carefully than anyone else. The first rumor reached the palace in early spring. A healer in the mountains rebuilt an entire village. Evander barely looked up from the report. The second arrived 2 weeks later. She opened schools where there had only been abandoned barns. He set the parchment aside. The third came from a merchant who had traveled farther north than most dared. "They call her the Snow Luna." That name stopped him. Snow Luna. His heart pounded for a reason he couldn't explain. "Describe her," he said quietly. The merchant frowned in thought. Dark hair, kind eyes, always wearing a silver wolf pendant. Evander's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood. The pendant. It had been his wedding gift to Isla. He hadn't seen it since the morning she disappeared. Within the hour, he was riding north. Not with an army, not with a royal procession. Only 2 guards and a guide who knew the mountain trails. The journey took 6 days. Every village along the way told the same story. "You're looking for the Snow Luna? Follow the river. She'll probably be helping someone. Everyone knows where to find her." No one spoke of her with fear. Only gratitude. When Evander finally reached the largest mountain village, he expected to find a grand healing house. Instead, he found laughter. Children were gathered outside a stone bakery dusted with flour. A woman stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled to her elbows, helping a little girl knead bread. The child giggled as flour covered both of them. The woman laughed, a full, joyful laugh. Evander forgot how to breathe. It was Isla. She looked healthier than he remembered. Her cheeks carried color from the mountain air. Her simple blue dress bore patches of flower instead of royal embroidery. She wasn't wearing a crown. She didn't need one. A little boy tugged on her sleeve. "Miss Isla, our bread is burning," she gasped dramatically. "Oh, then we'd better rescue it before it becomes stone." The children rushed inside, laughing. Only then did Isla notice the stranger standing across the square. Her smile faded into quiet surprise. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she wiped the flour from her hands and walked toward him. "You found me." Her voice carried no anger, only calm acceptance. Evander searched her face. "I've been looking for 3 years." "I know." "You knew?" She nodded. "Travelers talk." He swallowed hard. "Please, come home." She glanced around the village. An elderly woman waved from her garden. A group of children chased each other through the square. A young mother smiled gratefully as volunteers carried supplies into the healing house. Then Isla looked back at him. "I already am." 4 simple words. Yet they shattered every illusion he had carried for the past 3 years. He had spent countless nights believing the palace had been stolen from her. Now he understood. It had never truly been hers. She hadn't found a new home. She had built one. Evander looked around the bustling village again. For the first time, he saw it through her eyes. These people didn't bow because they feared her title. They smiled because they loved her. And suddenly, returning her to the palace felt less like bringing her home. and more like asking her to abandon it. Evander did not leave the next morning, or the morning after that. His 2 royal guards waited patiently outside the village for 3 days, before finally asking the question everyone else had been wondering. "Your Majesty, when are we returning to the capital?" Evander looked toward the healing house, where Isla was teaching children how to prepare winter herbs. "Not yet." The guards exchanged uncertain glances. "The council is expecting you." "They can expect a little longer." He sent them home with written instructions for his ministers. The kingdom would continue to function. For the first time in years, he allowed someone else to carry part of the burden. He rented a small room above the village carpenter's workshop. It had a narrow bed, a wooden chair, and a window overlooking the mountains. It was the simplest place he had ever lived. Oddly enough, he slept better there than he had inside the palace. The villagers remained cautious. A king staying among them felt unnatural. Most assumed he would soon grow tired of mountain life. Instead, he began working. When an elderly shepherd struggled to repair his roof after a late spring storm, Evander climbed onto it without being asked. When heavy sacks of grain arrived before harvest, he carried them into the village storehouse. He chopped firewood, cleared snow from narrow paths, helped rebuild a footbridge washed away by mountain runoff. No speeches, no royal announcements, only work. At first, Isla watched from a distance. She expected the effort to last a few days, perhaps a week. Then the novelty would fade. It never did. One afternoon, Maeve found her standing outside the healing house, watching Evander repair a broken wagon wheel with the village blacksmith. "You keep looking at him," the old healer observed. "I'm making sure he doesn't hurt himself." Maeve chuckled. "Of course you are." Isla folded her arms. "He's a king. He's learning to be a man." The words lingered in her thoughts. Weeks became months. The villagers slowly forgot to treat Evander like royalty. Children tugged on his sleeves when they needed help reaching apples from high branches. Farmers argued with him about the best way to mend fences. An old widow scolded him for carrying 2 water buckets at once. "You'll spill half of it." "I won't." "You already did." He looked down. She was right. The old woman laughed until tears filled her eyes. So did he. One crisp winter morning, the church bell rang wildly across the valley. Villagers rushed into the square. A shepherd stumbled into town, breathless. "The North Pass." He pointed toward the mountains. "An avalanche." There were children crossing to the next village. Silence fell. Then everyone moved at once. Without hesitation, Evander grabbed a coil of rope and a shovel. Isla caught his arm. "The pass is still unstable." "I know. It's too dangerous." He met her eyes. "They're someone's children." Before she could answer, he was already running toward the snow-covered mountains. And for the first time since the night she left the palace, Isla was terrified of losing him. The wind howled through the mountain pass. Snow fell so heavily that the world became nothing but white. By the time Isla and the other villagers reached the base of the avalanche, the rescue had already begun. Men dug frantically with shovels. Others used their bare hands. Parents called their children's names into the storm. No one answered. Maeve immediately began organizing the healers. Blankets by the fire. Boil water. Prepare the infirmary. Isla helped where she could, but her eyes searched the mountains. She was looking for only one person. Then someone shouted, "I found one!" A little girl was pulled from the snow, frightened but alive. Moments later, another child emerged. Then another. Each survivor whispered the same thing. "The tall man found us. He told us not to fall asleep. The king said he'd bring everyone home." Isla's heart pounded. "Where is he?" No one knew. The rescued children had been brought down first. Evander had remained behind. The storm worsened. Hours passed. Darkness began creeping across the mountains. Some villagers lowered their heads. No one survived this long buried beneath fresh snow. Then, A voice echoed through the valley. Over here. Everyone turned. A lone figure stumbled through the blizzard. His cloak was torn. One sleeve was stained with blood. Snow covered his hair and shoulders. In his arms, he carried a small boy wrapped tightly inside his own cloak. The child was crying. Alive. Evander reached the waiting crowd and carefully placed the boy into his mother's arms. Only then did his knees buckle. Several men caught him before he struck the ground. He saved all of them, one rescuer said breathlessly. He kept going back, again and again. Isla rushed to his side. His hands were raw from digging through ice. His lips had turned blue from the cold. There were cuts across his face where broken branches had struck him. Yet the first thing he asked was, "The children, they're safe?" She nodded. Every one of them. His shoulders relaxed. Good. Then he lost consciousness. For 2 days, Evander remained feverish. Isla rarely left his bedside. She changed the cold cloth on his forehead, prepared Maeve's medicines, sat quietly through the long nights, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. On the 3rd morning, he finally opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was Isla asleep in the chair beside him. She had fallen asleep with one hand resting lightly over his. When she stirred awake, relief flooded her face. "You frightened everyone." A faint smile appeared on his lips. "I wasn't trying to." She laughed softly through tears. "No. You were too busy saving everyone else." Silence settled between them. Then Evander spoke. "I used to think protecting the kingdom meant winning battles." He looked toward the snowy mountains beyond the window. "But I forgot. Kingdoms are made of people." His gaze returned to hers. "I forgot that love isn't something you postpone until duty is finished." The words settled gently in the quiet room. For the first time, Isla believed them. Not because he had spoken them, because he had lived them. Outside, villagers were already hanging lanterns across the square. The Winter Moon Festival was only days away. Neither of them knew it yet. But the celebration would become the beginning of a marriage that had never truly started on their wedding night. The first snow of the Winter Moon Festival fell just after sunset. Soft flakes drifted through the mountain village, settling on rooftops, pine branches, and the lanterns hanging above the square. Their golden light turned the snowfall into shimmering ribbons of silver. Children laughed as they chased one another through the snow. Families gathered around long wooden tables filled with fresh bread, roasted venison, hot cider, and honey cakes. Music floated through the valley. For the first time in years, Isla celebrated without pretending to smile. She stood beside Maeve, helping wrap warm scarves around excited children before they rushed back into the festivities. "You've built something beautiful," Maeve said quietly. Isla looked around the square. The healing house glowed warmly. The school stood filled with laughter. No one in the village would face the coming winter alone. "We all built it," Isla replied. Maeve smiled but said nothing. Across the square, the musicians gradually lowered their instruments. Conversations faded. Every eye turned toward the center of the festival. Evander stepped forward. He wore no royal robes, no jeweled cloak, no crown. Only a dark winter coat dusted with snow. In his hands rested a small cedar box, the same one Isla had left behind in the palace 3 years earlier. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Evander stopped before her. His voice carried clearly through the silent square. "Our first wedding belonged to 2 kingdoms." He opened the cedar box. Inside lay the silver wedding ring she had returned on the morning she disappeared. It belonged to duty. He lifted his eyes to hers. It belonged to peace treaties. It belonged to expectations. He carefully removed the ring, but it never truly belonged to us. The entire village stood motionless. Even the children sensed the importance of the moment. Evander smiled softly. "I can't erase the night I left you waiting. I can't ask you to forget it." His voice grew quieter. "But I can promise that if you choose me today, you'll never wait alone again." He held out the ring, not forcing it onto her hand, simply offering it. Isla looked at the circle of silver resting in his palm. 3 years earlier, she had believed leaving it behind meant the end of her marriage. Now she understood something different. That ring had never been broken. Only the people wearing it had been. She took the ring gently. Instead of waiting for him, she slid it onto her own finger. Then she reached for his hand. "This wedding," she whispered, smiling through happy tears, "belongs to us." The villagers erupted into cheers. Lanterns swayed in the snowy night. Maeve wiped discreet tears from her eyes. Children clapped excitedly. Then, beneath the softly falling snow, Isla rose onto her toes and kissed Evander. It wasn't their first kiss. It was their first kiss freely given. From the surrounding forest came a chorus of deep, echoing howls. The mountain wolves lifted their voices toward the moon, as though blessing the promise made beneath the winter sky. This time, their marriage truly began. The royal palace looked different when Isla returned. Not because its marble walls had changed, because she had. Months after the Winter Moon Festival, she and Evander rode through the palace gates side by side. This time, there were no political speeches, no treaty waiting to be signed, no expectations resting on her shoulders. The servants lined the entrance hall with genuine smiles, instead of practiced formality. Many remembered the quiet bride who had vanished before dawn. Now they welcomed a woman who walked with calm confidence, not because she wore a crown, but because she had discovered who she was without one. The old Luna wing stood exactly as she had left it. For only a moment. Then the renovations began. Unused guest chambers became warm shelters for widows who had nowhere else to go during the winter months. The grand reception hall was transformed into a refuge, where abandoned children could learn, eat, and sleep safely. Empty storerooms filled with blankets, medicine, and preserved food for travelers caught in mountain storms. Isla named it the House of Winter, not to remember the night she walked into the snow, but to ensure no one else ever faced it alone. Evander insisted on helping with every change. He carried furniture beside palace workers, loaded wagons with supplies, refused to let servants do work he could do himself. Some nobles quietly complained that a king shouldn't labor with common hands. Evander only smiled. A crown weighs less when it's carried beside other people. Each winter thereafter, he personally led food caravans into the northern mountains. Not because tradition demanded it, because he remembered. He remembered a frightened young bride waiting beside a dying fire. He remembered an empty bed, a silver ring inside a cedar box, a single sentence that had changed his life forever. Years passed. The House of Winter became known throughout every kingdom. Travelers planned their routes, knowing its doors would always remain open. Widows found community instead of loneliness. Children who had once feared the cold grew into healers, teachers, and craftsmen who returned to help others. One snowy evening, years later, 2 young children raced through the palace corridors. They burst into the courtyard where Evander was preparing another winter caravan. His daughter tugged on his cloak. "Father? Yes? Why do you always go yourself? Couldn't someone else deliver the supplies?" Evander smiled and lifted her into his arms. "They could. Then why don't they?" He looked toward Isla, who stood nearby, wrapping blankets for the journey. Their eyes met, then he answered, "Because once, I left the most important person in my life, alone, on a winter night. I was given a second chance I never deserved. So now," he kissed his daughter's forehead, "I make sure no one else faces the cold by themselves." History remembered the wedding, where an alpha king left his bride waiting. The people remembered something greater. The king who spent years becoming worthy of her trust. The Luna who found her own strength before choosing love again. And the second wedding beneath falling snow, where duty stepped aside, and 2 hearts finally chose one another freely. From that winter onward, No bride in the kingdom would ever spend her wedding night alone again.